Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Una Tormey, and CEO of the ITBA. On behalf of ITBA, its chairman, Cathy Grassick, and the council, I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon to the Curragh for our flat seminar, The Distance Debate. Just a couple of thank yous before we get started. Firstly, to the Curragh Racecourse, just for accommodating us here this afternoon on what is a busy afternoon of Derby Festival for them. And secondly, to our panel of experts for giving up their time so freely for what we hope is an afternoon of lively debate and discussion. We would encourage you to get involved. There will be a microphone throughout the afternoon. Ask questions, make comments. We would, like the feedback from the attendees as well. After the seminar, we'd welcome you to stay within the marquee. There will be food and refreshments, and we hope you stay around to enjoy the evening's racing as well. We have a last-minute change to our panel, to our host primarily. Unfortunately, due to travel delays, our host, Sally-Ann Grassick, is unable to be with us this afternoon, and we're delighted that our chairman, Cathy Grassick, is able to step into the hosting duties. So I'm just going to, hand over to our chairman just for a few words to give a bit of an insight into what we can expect this afternoon, and to introduce our panel. And once again, thanks all for turning out on a rainy afternoon.
So first of all, as chairman, I would like to welcome you all here this afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many people so engaged with what we're doing and to try and look at the breeding of a better horse. So this isn't to say one thing is right or one thing is wrong, but what we are looking at is to improve the product that we are producing, both for racing and breeding. And I think that's very important. And so we're going to look at ways that we can use the distance debate to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panel. We have Kevin Blake, very well-known, familiar face and analyst. He's also a breeder in his own right and a member of the Flat Pattern Committee in Ireland. Stuart Boman, who's a graduate of the Godolphin Flying Start. He also worked in Arrowfield Stud in Australia and is now a leading bloodstock agent with Blandford Bloodstock. Aidan McGuinness, who's a Group 1 winning trainer and also chairman of the Trainers Association in Ireland. Jason Morris, who is head of racing in HRI, and he's also chairman of the European Pattern Committee. And John Ox, who's also champion trainer, Group 1 winning trainer, and now director of Staffordstown Stud. So I apologise for my not being quite as skilled a host as maybe you expected, but with short notice, I'm going to do my very best to keep everything flowing. So without further ado, I think if any of you have been familiar with the work that Kevin has been publishing this week, Kevin has been writing some very salient points about the distance debate in a number of sections this week that were published on At The Race's website. So we'll kick off with Kevin and let Kevin make some comment about what he produced.
Hi everyone. To start off with, I don't want to go off on a big speech because this bit of work that Cathy refers to, it's quite a lengthy piece. I've spent about 6 months on it, so there's quite a bit in it. So I'll do my best to summarise it as best I can. As I'm sure you all will, we try to use statistics and various numbers to guide us in our breeding endeavours and our racing endeavours. But look, not all statistics were born equal. You get some good ones, you get some bad ones, you get some ones that can be up for debate. So look, in pursuing this project, I was trying to make it as broad and as concise in a way in trying to assess what's significant, what isn't significant, and what the key messages we can take from the numbers are. So I'm sure most of you on your table will have some little extracts there of some of the numbers that I pulled. The first thing I wanted to do was establish what the best breeding nations in the world were, in a sense. One can argue some of the details in there, but I thought it was important to establish the size of the breeding industries in each country, with a particular emphasis on flat foals, because in Ireland and in the UK and in France, there's obviously quite a lot of national hunt foals in there every year, and that can just play with the samples a little bit. So I stripped out all the national hunt foals out of those, and the numbers you see there are flat-only foal crops. And then I assessed where the best horses in the world were bred, what suffix they have beside their name. When I say best race horses, rated 115 plus, 120 plus. And you'll see from the breakdowns there, contextualized by the foal crops, that we have a lot to be proud of in Ireland. We lead the way. We lead the way by a margin in both categories. And I think that's a great testament to what we do in this country. It's not just environmental factors. It's not just the quality of bloodstock. It's the quality of the people as well and the horsemanship. So for a nice positive starting point, I think we as Irish breeders have a lot to be proud of. Some of those countries a little bit further down the line, and you might be a little bit surprised by how far down they are and how poorly they compare to Ireland. But look, I think there's reasons that can be hammered down that explain that. But look, once we establish the crop sizes and where the good horses are coming from, I think it was important to then delve into those numbers to establish, right, what type of horse are we breeding? What are we doing? What are we best at? What do we need to work on? Do we have a balanced breeding industry? And what I found was when you hammered into those world's best racehorse rankings and where they were bred, there was a very clear picture emerging. And that is that if you took just the horses that performed over 9.5 furlongs or further on turf, there was a very, very clear trend for the best horses in the world to be bred in Ireland and the UK. 48% in total were bred in those countries, which is clearly a huge proportion, given that the foal crops in the UK and Ireland would only account for about 10% of all thoroughbred flat foals in the world. So we're seeing massive overperformance from British and Irish breds in what we would often call middle distance racing. But then when you flip it around and look at sprints, which is in the main up to 7 furlongs, the British and Irish don't perform all that well. 17.5% of the best sprinters, by the definition of the world's best racehorse rankings, were bred in Britain and Ireland. And that won't be a shock to everyone, I think. But then when you look at how British and Irish breeders breed their mares, what stallions they select, that is where I suppose the inherent contradiction comes up, because you'd say, right, we're clearly world class at breeding horses that stay middle distances. We surely, as breeding nations, would be concentrating on those areas, focusing in on those strengths. But that's not actually the case at all. And you'll see in the second table there on the paper in front of you, I've broken down the total coverings in the UK and Ireland by the maximum winning trip of the stallion. And you'll see that there's a huge bias there towards stallions that won over no further than 7 furlongs. Like, personally, I think it's a very stark statistic that of all the flat mares in the UK and Ireland in 2022, 52% of them went to stallions that won over no further than 7 furlongs. So basically, over time, this massive emphasis on sprinting stallions has come about in the UK and Ireland, despite the racetrack telling us that that's not what we're best at in a worldwide context. And look, as we know, there's a whole heap of reasons why that has come about. I'm sure if we did a straw poll in this room and asked the question, right, what is the most commercially clever thing to do if you want to breed a racehorse and make money at the sales, most people would assume that focusing on speed and precocity would be the way to go. But look, in the course of the report, I've delved into some of these widespread assumptions, widespread perceptions, and they don't necessarily stand up to scrutiny, which is where I'm going to pitch this discussion in terms of, right, are we doing the right thing in how we breed our mares? Are these assumptions correct? Are we doing the right thing for not only the breed, but for ourselves in commercial terms? Because to wind up this bit of a monologue, the biggest fear that I have, having conducted this analysis and assessed the bigger picture, is that we're not breeding nearly enough horses that will stay middle distances. And the problem that creates is, while we may not be playing to our strengths in terms of trying to breed that type of horse, the international markets, which are massively important now, in the Middle East, in Australia, in America, all over the world, the horses they want are the ones that stay further than a mile. And those markets are only getting bigger, in particular in the Middle East. Saudi, racing in Saudi is likely to grow massively in the next few years, and they're going to need horses. And they're going to come to us because, as demonstrated, we are the best in the world at producing this type of horse. And if our breeders don't change their behaviour and start to breed more of these horses, I would be really fearful for the quality of our pattern race product over those sort of distances. I feel we're already seeing it. An awful lot of really promising horses are getting sold after they win their maidens, even before they win their maidens in some cases. And I think it's a real challenge. It's a real issue for us. And if we want to act and try to prevent that happening, we really probably needed to start doing it a few years ago, because as everyone knows, breeding racehorses is a process that there's quite a long lag. You know, if everyone in this room went home from this conversation today and said, right, I think these lads and ladies are talking wonderful sense, I'm going to try and breed middle distance horses from next year. That's a 2024 covering, that's a 2025 foal, that's the 2-year-old of 2027, the 3-year-old of 2028. All of a sudden, it's a long way down the line before we start seeing the benefit of any changes. So what I would like to come from this is that people take in the facts, take in, you know, the reading of the situation, and realize that there is quite a bit of urgency over this. You know, we should be making, and in fairness to the European Pattern Committee, I think they've identified these issues themselves quite a few years ago and have tried to address them. But we're seeing from the 2022 covering data, which is what all these numbers are pulling from, that the breeders haven't really responded yet. So my thought is that we need to take perhaps more direct action. But look, I'm really looking forward to hearing all the ladies and gents' thoughts. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the situation. And hopefully we can have a really beneficial and positive conversation about this.
Thank you, Kevin. And I was just noticing there when you were talking about international markets that, Stuart, you were nodding along in agreement. So maybe you have some insight for us about what the international markets are looking for.
Sure, definitely. Look, the main market I work is to Australia. So I purchase horses for Australia, primarily horses that have run, but also yearlings and increasing breeze up horses as well. And also the barrier trials, the ITBA barrier trials. Almost all of my clients are primarily looking for horses that are going to go 1,600 meters to 2,400 meters, perform on firm ground. I've got increasing demand, and I'm finding it extraordinarily difficult to secure what I want and what my clients want. It's one of those things that the dynamic of the market, it's a hard thing to do to go and draw a long bow and breed a stayer, you know. But ultimately, the market wants that. You know, that's exactly what we're after, and my clients, you know, seek it the whole time. And it's every region. It's not just Australia. It's Hong Kong. It's the Middle East, as Kevin has said, in an increasing amount. It's one of those areas that fundamentally the dynamics of investing in that and taking that long-term view is a hard thing to do. But if you do it well and you do it right, the demand is there and it's only growing. So.
And what about America as a market, Stuart? I know you've had some success with buying some fillies for America.
Have to go 2 turns. You know, if you present anything that's a 5 furlong or a 6 furlong horse, it's not even considered. So it's the same, you know, in Hong Kong as well. There's certain pockets of horses that are all of a sudden worth a lot more money, and simply the primary factor is distance that they're going to race over.
Okay, so I think none of us in this room would disagree with the fact that John Ox is probably one of the supremos of training this distance horse, and would have more experience than all of us put together about what is necessary for that type of horse. And I'd be interested to get your thoughts, John.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say, because I can see the way this conversation is going, the first thing is that speed is important, and we do need speed, and it was always there from the beginning. If you read the history books, you know, the first thing that the people in the 1700s wanted to produce was speedier horses and more precocious horses. So there's nothing new in the present fashion, if you like. It's been a fashion since the 1700s. And we need speed, and I can understand why stallion masters go the way they go. And if they didn't trawl the market for horses with speed who could stand at affordable prices for breeders, we'd never have had Kodiak or Dark Angel, or the National Stud had Ahanura years ago who stood at 2,500 to begin with. Indian Ridge, who started off at 4,000, and then Invincible Spirit. So, you know, it's important to say that. But of course, what we need is the balance. And so, what was it you asked me about? So, yeah, look at a couple of questions, a couple of things, points. Just I'll make briefly. People confuse speed with precocity. Precocity is what everybody's looking for now. Not every sprinter, fast sprinter, is precocious. Plenty of them need time. Not every precocious horse that shows early form ends up being a good horse. The other thing we confuse is speed and distance. People think just because a horse runs over a longer distance, he doesn't have speed. If you look at the sectional times, and hopefully we're going to see a lot more of that in the future, it's been a long time coming, but it's on its way. You see that the horses running over 1.5 miles cover the last 5 furlongs, 3 furlongs, 4 furlongs, just as fast as the sprinters cover the last few furlongs of a sprint race. That even comes down to Stradivarius in the Gold Cup there. His owner produced figures when he was trying to flog him as a stallion. He produced figures to show that. Distance horses are speedy horses, but nobody seems to understand it. They just need a little bit more time to develop, maybe. And horses race with their lungs, or with their cardiovascular system, of course, too, but they've really efficient lungs for galloping. And the better horses who have the better lungs carry their speed for longer. They can maintain speed. They've got the same speed as the short runners. They just carry it for longer. They keep going. They don't stop. And they have that just superior respiratory system. You know, horses are, you know, they have an anatomy and a physiology, and that's what differentiates them. And that's where, you know, carrying speed for longer is what I'm sure we must be looking for. We must be trying to produce the superior athletic specimen. In America, for instance, we look on American horses as speedy. But the thing that everybody in America seems to want to buy and to breed is a horse who'll carry the speed for 2 turns, carry the speed for 1.25 miles. The Kentucky Derby, everyone wants to win that. And it's a grueling race, flat out. The first half mile fast as any sprint. And they just are looking for the horse that can keep going. Japanese horses, they're breeding, you know, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and you look at the fractions for the last 4 and 5 furlongs that they're running, they're sprinting fractions. So we have to make a decision. Is that, you know, what sort of horses do we want? You know, do we want to try and breed the best athletic specimen that we can, or do we want to dilute that? Some people say, well, sure, it doesn't matter, you know, we'll just have racing, we'll have it all over a short distance. But anyway, it's the balance, and we need speed, but we need speed that can be maintained.
Well, I think that's very interesting, John. I think anybody who's been to the Irish National Stud and visited their horse experience, one of the things that's really, really eye-catching is actually the cardiovascular display, and where they show the actual size of a horse's heart and lung capacity. And I think I've spoken to so many people who've been to see that and who've been really amazed at how that affects how they look at their horses. You know, that is something that's very, very important. It'll be interesting to hear from Ado. You've trained champion sprinters and have had a, you know, huge success with the case of you. Maybe you could tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I think if I had to go out and buy middle distance horses all the time, I wouldn't be in business today, because the wait is too long for the likes of me. We would be more commercially, like, to survive, we need to buy them the 2-year-old I look for every year is a speedy 2-year-old. Now, I'm going against Kevin, and I do agree that if you have a middle distance horse or a horse that'll stay a trip, he's worth an awful lot of money. But I can't compete with that market. So my theory in when we're buying our 2-year-olds, we buy speed because we know we get a quick return on our investment most of the time, and we can get them away quick. We're not going to get a massive amount of money for them, but we survive. And there's certain, like I haven't got a budget going to the yearling sales every year that I can buy middle distance pedigrees, and that's a huge difference for me. So I have to work within my budget and within my clients, and I can't afford to do that at the present moment because one, the wait will be too long, and you know, a middle distance horse is you're not going to know as a 2-year-old that he's going to be a middle distance horse. Most of them are going to take into their 3-year-old year and maybe further, but definitely they will take into their 3-year-old year. So it's a year and a half wait for the likes of me. I don't do that. I try and turn them and go back in again every year. And we've been very lucky with speedier types of horses. And I do agree that I'd love to be able to buy more distance horses, but then I'm coming out every day and I'm competing again probably the best breeding organisation in the world, which is in this country, and they've the best horses and the best staying pedigrees in the world. And if I'm there with a cheaper a yearling, I've really no chance of beating them. I might come across one that will, but you come across it rather than find it.
Yeah, I think Ado raises two really good points there in terms of the barriers to redressing this balance. You know, it's time and money, you know, two of the most important considerations of whatever you're doing. And the time argument is very fair. You know, if you're buying that middle distance type of horse, it can often be seen as a kind of a 2-year cycle for a trainer rather than a 1-year cycle. And you need your owners to be on board and to be able to and willing to eat those training fees for maybe a year without getting a run. And that can be a difficult sell. And the other problem is money. And why I say that in terms of it's a stallion thing, in that when you break down, you'll see the number in front of you there in terms of the percentage of stallions, the percentage of coverings of stallions that won over 9.5 furlongs plus. It's about a fifth of all mares are covered by that type of stallion. But when you break into that, you know, there's a huge disparity there between horses that stand for over 15,000 and less than 15,000. Only 5% of all coverings in the UK and Ireland were by stallions that won over 9.5 or further and stood for less than 15 grand. You know, those stallions are dominated by the real big boys, you know, the Frankels, the Galileos, which, you know, simply aren't accessible to the vast majority of the market, be it as breeders or as buyers. So you've got your two challenges there in that you have to convince your owner to give it the time that it needs, but you also have the problem as a breeder. If you, again, like as mentioned, if people in this room set out to go home and revise their own strategy, when you go to mate your mares next spring, the level of choice there at what we'll call a commercial level, 15 grand or less for that type of horse, is really limited. And when you look at the list of those horses in that category, a lot of them, you know, dare I say, are has-beens or never-beens. Without wanting to be disrespectful, you know, there isn't a lot of commercial options there, and that's a big challenge as well. You know, in comparison to the sprinter type, you know, a huge amount of those get retired every year. They're given a chance, and they attract mere numbers, and people feel they have a commercial chance of turning them over. But we don't. It only tends to be the very best middle distance horses that get retired as flat stallions. A fair few of the ones that maybe fall under that top class bracket will end up standing as national hunt stallions, which makes them really commercially unattractive to flat breeders. So we'll talk about, I'm sure, as we progress the conversation, the links in the chain along this process. And the very first one is the stallions. And if the stallions aren't there for the breeders, you know, the whole thing is a non-starter from the get-go, because it's no good the breeders being on board with the concept and the ideology if the suitable stallions aren't there at the right price level to give them the chance to go and, you know, breed that type of horse and have a commercial chance to make a profit doing it.
Interesting. And then Jason, we might talk to you about in your dual roles with HRI and with the European Pattern Committee, how you've had a look and your experience with the changing in racing and the demand for different races. What are you seeing developing?
Yeah, I think I'll start by looking at it from a European Patent Committee context. I suppose I've been on that committee for many years and became the chair last year, but towards the end of 2015, when we were reviewing the statistics, it was quite concerning how much the number of horses had dropped in the extended distance category within the World Thoroughbred rankings. So it had fallen from, I think, 124 in 2012, progressively each year, year on year, down to 88 by 2015. And so we set up a subcommittee, which I then chaired, to look at how we could really try and address and stop that clear decline that we were seeing in European racing. And I think initially the focus was on the staying race area, and particularly long distance racing. So we took a number of actions at that point. We introduced a moratorium for 5 years on any downgrades of staying races, which has now actually been extended out to 2027. We increased the number of black type races throughout Europe in the staying race category, so that's grown from 62 to 76, including some new Group 1s. The Goodwood Cup was upgraded. The Prix de Royalier was upgraded on Art Weekend for fillies. We looked to the 3-year-old programme in particular, so in an Irish context there were virtually no 3-year-old staying races at all to target horses at. So we created races like the Yates at Navan and the Vignereau at Leopardstown. We wanted to encourage the retention of horses, obviously, in Europe, and particularly fillies and mares, which was addressed by races such as the Prix de Royalier, the Lily Langtry at Goodwood, and then races in Ireland like the Vintage Tipple and the Stanero introduced. So it was a pan-European exercise to try and look at what we could do across the whole staying race category. And positively, that has seen that number stabilise effectively around the sort of 90 mark since, in terms of the number of horses in that category. The reason for it, again, was the ratings of those races historically were under tremendous pressure. We were seeing continued exports of our best stayers, particularly to Australia at the time, and we do want to encourage owners to go out and buy from breeders horses with stamina. And we recognise, particularly in a British and Irish context, why is European racing preeminent? It's because, as Kevin has already explained, we create the best middle distance horses in the world in Ireland and Britain. And it's very important that stamina is a very key influencing factor in that. When we reviewed the success, I suppose, in broader context last year, we are very conscious that whilst we may have stabilised the issue, that there are broader challenges. And I would just like to commend Kevin on his work. As he's already said, he's a member of Flat Patent Committee. I think it came out of discussions at the Flat Patent Committee, but he then went away and did this really useful bit of analysis. And I would, suggest, if you haven't already done so, please do read the whole report, because there's a lot of interesting data in there. I think what it shows is that there's a significant imbalance now in terms of what's being produced and where the actual programme is. So 45% of stakes races, black type races for 3-year-olds and upwards, are now over 10 furlongs plus in Britain and Ireland. If you include France, that's 48%. So virtually half the races are aimed at middle distance horses, and yet we're only producing 20% of horses which are sent to stallions who effectively have proven themselves over 10 furlong and further. So there's a significant imbalance in terms of the quality of horses we're producing, the race programme at a European level, and the production of horses. So I do feel there is an opportunity for breeders, and Kevin, I'm sure, will touch later on some of the commercial returns and the fact that the figures in his paper show that you can actually get better returns for breeding horses with stamina. But equally, you're fishing in much shallower waters. If you're producing sprinters, 50% of the horses are from sprint-bred stallions. If you're producing a horse with more stamina from a proven stallion with more stamina, then you've got less competition in the marketplace. So I hope that's one of the key messages that comes out, is that the horse population isn't currently being produced to fulfill the needs. And then when you hear Stuart saying he can't get enough horses from Europe, it does make you worry about, that there's a huge demand out there, but how do we keep those horses in Europe and keep the preeminence of European racing in what is our best area?
And I had an interesting point brought up with me last week in Ascot. We were just talking about this topic of conversation, and an English trainer suggested, slightly playing devil's advocate, that is the reason that our sprinters are not as highly rated as the Australian sprinters, is that Australia is very, very focused on their speed programme, and that they rate their sprinters better than we do, that we have a bias to maybe rate our staying races with a higher rating, and that some of our sprinters mightn't get the equivalent ratings. And they were saying that maybe we don't rate our sprinters as highly, because his point was, if you were to look at some of the sprint races in Ascot, which had Australian runners over the last few years, that the Irish and English horses had actually held up quite well in, you know, in somewhere like Royal Ascot, where there was a comparison.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I suppose, again, Kevin's figures show that I think 57% of the best sprinters in the world were based in Australia, which compared to 17% in Europe. So that's, you know, suggesting the fact that Australian sprinting horse population is dominant. And, you know, probably historically, and I appreciate the last couple of years may have bucked the trend somewhat, but I think historically the top Australian sprinters, when they used to came across, were typically dominant at Royal Ascot. And, you know, there may have been reasons why perhaps they weren't as successful the last couple of years, but it's undoubtedly that if you have a very strong horse population, that drives the ratings up. What we're seeing in a European context is that both for sprinters and stayers, really those extreme distance areas, that those races are under pressure. So our sprint races are under pressure. We only have one sprint race in Ireland at Group 1 level, the Flying Five. It's our least performing group race in terms of ratings. It may be subject to potential downgrading in the future. No different to France or Britain. A lot of the sprint races, the Commonwealth Cup, recently introduced, and everybody would say a great success, but it's not rating that strongly. I do think there's probably, when it comes to ratings, sprint races can produce freak results. Obviously, the winner in Royal Ascot last week wasn't probably expected, and so possibly the best four horses weren't necessarily reflected in the first four, whereas typically, probably in middle distance and staying races, you would tend to see the first four, and that's the basis, for those who don't know, when we judge European races, and indeed globally, it's based on the first four horses who finish, so sometimes you can get false ratings as a result. But, you know, it is quite clear that historically, anyway, the Australians are preeminent in when it comes to producing high-quality sprinters.
And John, would you like to comment?
Problem with sprint ratings is that we haven't had really superior sprinters who win by a wide margin. When you're doing the ratings and the weights for sprints, one length is three pounds. If it's a mile and a half, one length is 1 pound. So you have to have a sprinter who wins by a couple of lengths to make a 6 pound rise in the ratings. All the sprint races, a lot of the group races over sprinting distances are won by small margins. So, you know, if 3 pounds is one length, well, all he can get is 1 or 2 pounds. So until you find some sprinters winning the Group 1s by 3 and 4 lengths, you're not going to see high ratings.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you, John. And maybe Stuart, yeah, in relation to Australia, would you have some comment on that?
Sure. Look, Australian breeding is simply to breed sprinters. You know, the stallion making races, the Golden Slipper, it was introduced 80 years ago. We're bred for speed in Australia ever since. And if these numbers were done, if Kevin did his study in Australia, it'd be so hugely skewed towards sprinting. Not only the stallions, but the dams. You know, you go to a yearling sale now, and if the dams won beyond a mile, it's almost impossible to get them sold. You know, it's getting to that degree. So look, with regards to, you know, the beaten margins and those sorts of things, the same would apply in Australian sprints. They're generally smaller beaten margins. I think ultimately the Australian sprinter, I think on average is far superior to what is in offer in Europe, and there is very much a niche in the market to be buying European stayers that were going to perform at a distance beyond a mile in Australia. It's the ones that work from Europe that have gone down there are simply the horses that perform at 9 furlongs and above, and that's ironically in Australia. That's where most of the prize money resides. Even though we've got a population of horses that sprint, and for 2-year-olds in particular, the majority, the real big prize money is in races that are at 10 furlongs and beyond. So,
and actually, you know, one of the things that I think is interesting, and it's going back to John's point about the speed is still essential for the horses, is if you look at some of the horses that have been very successful in Australia, it's actually maybe they had 1 over 6 furlongs or 7 furlongs as 2-year-olds, but so they had natural speed.
100%.
But then,
Yeah.
so Trip to Paris would be a horse who won as a 2-year-old over 6 furlongs, and who did actually very well in Australia consistently, even though he would have appeared to be an out-and-out stayer. He had that turn of foot, which is necessary in Australia. So I think John's point about speed still being very essential and to play its part in the breeding is very important.
100%. We want quick horses, and that's it's as simple as that. The ones that work, the ones that I've sent anyway that work, were quick horses. You know, they all registered good speed figures. They performed at 7 furlongs over a mile at least. And if they're breaking their maiden over 10 furlongs, they're just not quick enough.
So it'd be interesting to ask those people who are buying in the marketplace. You know, I know, Kevin, you were suggesting that this transition has to be breeder-led, but from a breeder point of view, you know, unless they're feeling that there's that demand in the marketplace, you know, how do we go about improving this at the sales level? Because a lot of the breeders here will be worried about, if I go and start changing my pattern, is this something that there is going, you know, so maybe people who are, you know, buying horses in the marketplace could maybe just talk to us a little bit about you know, putting breeder confidence in doing that.
Yeah, well, look, it's really important, Cathy, because, look, everyone knows that breeds, and I'm sure most of the audience are breeders, that, you know, in financial terms, you live and die by your matings, really. And if you get it wrong with your matings a number of years in a row, it can be enough to really put you in dire straits, you know. So it's a big thing to ask of breeders to change their strategy, and they will need reasons to have confidence that they can get results, you know, not just on the track, as you say, but in the sales ring too. So, like, I think if you're going to look at this issue, and if you're happy to decide, right, this is something that we need to try and influence the balance here, as John rightly says, it is a balance. You know, I think you have to look at all those links of the chain along the way. You know, this all starts off with the stallion man has to be confident to stand that type of stallion at that type of money, and have confidence that breeders are then going to support that stallion. If that doesn't happen, the whole thing doesn't start. And if you can deliver that, and the breeders then use that stallion, they have to then have confidence that at the foal sales or the yearling sales, that there's going to be people there to buy those horses, be they end users, be they pinhookers. And I think there's a few different things we could do along the way to help stimulate that and help make it more attractive for everyone. You know, one thing that I did touch on in terms of the proposed solutions was the possibility of a new or add-on to an existing breeze-up sale that would cater to that slightly longer term type of horse. You know, it could take place around this time of year, maybe slightly earlier, maybe the tie-in with Ascot, maybe the tie-in with the Curragh. The breeze could be over 3 furlongs potentially. I know that's a point of contention. I've spoken to quite a few breeze-up consigners about this concept, but the thought would be that if you create that type of breeze-up sale, it shortens the cycle for ADO's clients, we'll say, for example, that don't want to wait a year and a half before they have a runner. If they can turn up at this time of year and buy that type of horse that the breeze-up consigner has spent, you know, 8-9 months working on with a view to making a profit themselves, if ADO can then come into a sale like that, purchase based on what they see on the track, then they might, you know, conceivably have a runner in a couple of months. You know, it definitely shortens the cycle, and it also creates a new trade in that type of yearling will become more attractive, one would hope, to the breeze-up consigners at the sales. And if there's a more active trade around that type of horse at the yearling sales, that will generate a more active trade about them at the foal sales, where pinhookers are looking to lean into that. You know, so the point and the hope is that you lean into every step of the way. And then the other main part in terms of proposals was then to incentivize end users. You know, I think Ado mentioned in terms of, you know, the difficulty in competing with, let's say, Coolmore, for example, in maidens in this country. Everyone sees that as a challenge, rightly so, that they're brilliant at what they do. But what I feel one of the best things that's happened from a programming point of view in Ireland in recent years is the creation of the auction series, you know, the median auction series. You know, they've been absolutely brilliant. You know, people can go and compete on a level playing field at that lower to mid-end of the yearling market and know that they'll have a destination to run in with excellent prize money, where you're not banging heads with Galileos and Frankels, etc. You know, they've been brilliant. I'd be in favour of even more of those. But the thought was that in terms of creating an additional incentive around that type of horse, we've seen the IRE bonus, we've seen the GB bonus do really well. I would introduce a new bonus, call it what you like, a classic bonus, confined to the offspring of stallions that have won over 9.5 furlongs or further. To encourage people to buy that type of horse, and I would structure it slightly differently to the existing bonuses, in that it would reward both the end user, the owner, and the breeder, because again it comes back to, we need the stallion men, we need the breeders to be encouraged and to be incentivized to use this type of stallion to start the process. So if you split that bonus in two and gave we'll call it 10 grand, to lay in with the IRE bonus structure, if the breeder was getting 5 grand of that and the owner was getting 5 grand of that, but not in cash, I think that one of the real benefits of the IRE bonus, the structure of it, is the voucher system. And in this case, the breeder's 5 grand could be redeemed against a classic status stallion the following season, and for the owner, it could be redeemed against buying a classic qualified yearling at the yearling sales. So as well as rewarding them for their initial purchase, if it succeeds on the track, you're then incentivizing them to get directly back into that sector and to generate more turnover within it. I think what I have in mind, it's quite different to the way things are done now, but having assessed this and looked at it from which angle I could possibly come up with, I think direct incentives are the way to go in terms of generating quick change, because that's what we need. As mentioned, the lag is significant in what we're talking about, and you need to hit the various links of the chain all at once, so that hopefully everybody gets confidence together, and within a number of years we can see tangible change in terms of that balance.
That's great, Kevin. I think the thing that a lot of breeders will be concerned about is how that's going to be funded, such a bonus scheme. And I think that's something that takes careful reflection. And also, if there's €5,000 vouchers available in that market space, how would that have a knock-on effect on the actual stallion fees of those horses? So, being a cynic and the laws of supply and demand, sometimes that, so there are definite merits to suggesting about a bonus scheme, but there's also, things that have to be considered.
Danger of unintended consequences. Yeah, and look, you've seen that in other sectors. Sometimes when stimuluses are introduced into them, they can have unintended consequences. Like for first-time buyers, there was some incentives brought in there not long ago, and all of a sudden the house prices went up to mirror the amount of incentive being given. So that is a possibility and something that needs to be considered. But again, look, you don't know until you try. And look, I think we need to give people confidence to get stuck into this type of horse, and not for the good of for the greater good of the breed, but because this can work commercially for us in the longer term.
I'd agree.
Yeah, Howard.
I'd agree with Kevin wholeheartedly. I think incentivization in this situation is anything that's going to rectify it. There's a market failure here. The commercial incentives are breeding what is demanded by my clients. It's failing. There's undersupply and there's overdemand, and the links in the chain, as Kevin says, it's a hard thing to redress. And putting yourself in the shoes of people who are going to go out there and breed their mare to a stallion that's slightly unfashionable and possibly on the wane and 1 over 10 furlongs, it's a hard thing to do. So incentivization is what's going to change behavior, and I think that's to improve generally. And I think, thank God Kevin arrived today and spoke here, because I think, he's making some very valid points and some very good suggestions. And just to touch back onto the breeze up concept, I work with my colleagues. The breeze up sell probably the most. We've been the most active buyers as a group, and I have seen over the last five to 6 years an increase in the size of the horses that are being offered, but also the ones that are bred to get a bit further. I think personally, I bought 10 or 12 horses. Primarily, most of them were all big horses that were bred to get a trip, and they've been asked to do this at an early stage. Having a sale now would be absolutely ideal. I love the ITM barrier trials. I think I'm probably one of the number one fans of it. Been very successful at buying some horses out of them. Unfortunately, the next lot have been cancelled, which is unfortunate. But I think, and I know from my clients, that they just crave to get these horses earlier in the process, and they're actually taking the step now to enter. I've got a number of clients that are going to be buying at the yearling stage, staying bred horses and racing them here and bringing them on the OTI racing and a few other syndicators in Australia.
Yeah, and I have to say that if you look through the results, like, you know, if you look at the sales results in Goffs, Book 1, Book 2, you see the steady increase of Australian buyers and trainers buying at these sales. You know, I myself have bought a couple of horses that have gone out to training last year that have gone out to training in Australia, and they're by those distance stallions. You know, that's what they want. And they're now buying them as yearlings, not just as tried horses. So it is really, you know, they are playing active parts in the marketplace. Ado, I'd be very interested to get your thoughts on would this captivate you? I know you had a distance winner in Naas the other day, but so you're not just a sprint trainer.
The one thing I will say, it's like the big studs are the big stallion, you know, the studs that stand these stallions, the big commercial stallions, they stand mainly speed stallions more so than the longer distance stallions. I know the ratings, Kevin has his ratings and that, but it's the practicality of it all for someone with the likes of me. If I have to wait, like, I do agree with what they're saying, but it's the practicality of it. Will you survive it? And like, we have to do something that we know we're guaranteed we're going to survive, not think that we're going to survive. We have to be more or less guaranteed that, like, you know, we do this, we have a great chance of doing it. But if I have to wait, I can't afford to wait, and there's a lot of guys with me, and the breeze up guys, most of them, a lot of the guys go to breeze up sales and they buy speed horses because they want something that's going to run very fast. And I know at the very start we've bought a good few breeze up horses this year, and we've been very lucky with some. The emphasis on breeze up sales at the very start, before Ascot, is all about getting a horse to go to Ascot, and then after that, it's more of a nicer horse that's going to stay and that will stay, and he'll gallop. You know, that he doesn't have to be a fast horse, but as Stuart says, like, there is them two type of horses at the breeze up sales, so it's up to guys that are buying them to judge them, but it's practicality for me.
John, would you like to?
Ado mentioned Royal Ascot, and Royal Ascot is part of the problem, actually. You know, it'd be a great thing if they moved Royal Ascot to August, you know, because it's putting an awful lot of pressure on trainers. Yeah, it's putting pressure on the breeze up people, you know. Everybody knows in their heart and soul that, you know, the horses are better off if they're not rushed. But there's a cohort of owners out there now who just want to go to Ascot, and trainers have the gun to their heads. And I mean, imagine, and it's been like this for a while, there were 22 runners in the Coventry this year, 28 in the Queen Mary, 26 in the Windsor Castle, 16 in the Norfolk, that was a bit more sensible, 18 in the Albany, not too bad. But imagine 28 two-year-olds running over 5 furlongs at Ascot. Most of them had no damn chance at all. And imagine all the others that were attempting to be there and fell by the wayside, you know. So anyway, that's an irrelevant point. Ascot is not going to change. It's going to stay. It's going to stay in June. But there's just too much pressure on trainers. Speaking as a trainer, there's too much pressure on trainers and to reach Ascot with a 2-year-old. It's a shame, really. I was just thinking today, Vincent O'Brien, you know, this is a long time ago, I'm showing my age, but Vincent O'Brien had a lot of champion 2-year-olds, a lot of great horses. But I can only remember when I was younger, one of my first years at Ascot, he won the Norfolk Stakes with a grey horse, Magic Mirror, I think he was, ridden by Lester Piggott. I can't remember him, and somebody's going to contradict me here, I can't remember him winning another of the Ascot 2-year-old races. Now, Christy Grassick and the Coolmore lads there will probably tell me we won with this, that and the other. But, you know, he was to produce his nice horses this weekend at the Curragh. Sir Ivor had his first start here this weekend. Nijinsky won a 6-furlong maiden next Saturday, the weekend after this. And his 2-year-olds just got going in July and August, you know. So, but he was under no pressure. He's not probably irrelevant to this argument. But you know, there's just too much pressure on everybody.
Excellent. Well, I think you know, you can see that, and there were huge numbers of 2-year-olds, you know, and as you said, John, those numbers are not even, you know, beginning to count the number of horses that didn't make it. Ado, do you think that an incentive or a later breeze up would be of help to you to take a chance on one of these horses?
Definitely, the incentives are they're a great idea, and I think, as Kevin says, it's the only way you're going to get people to change is to give them an incentive to you know, and it's great for even the smaller man up to the bigger man. The incentive, it's a great way to, you know, to get somebody to change.
No, likewise, I would totally echo, and you know, both Kevin's suggestions would support them. I think a later breeze up can only be of benefit to those horses who are being over-rushed probably to get there at the moment, and encourage more stamina-bred horses to go through the breeze ups as well, and also potentially give an opportunity for trainers to have a quicker return, because I take the point entirely, Ado, that you've got a lot of owners, most owners want to see you know, a return for investment sooner rather than later, and if there's a narrower gap between appearing at a breeze ups and then appearing on the track, that's going to be of assistance to you to perhaps change the focus. The incentive scheme, absolutely. Obviously, we've got to, as you've already pointed out, Cathy, we've got to work out the funding for it, but I think it's, you know, it has to be done. We have to try and change behaviour, and, you know, I think we recognise that is a long-term play. That's not an instant, overnight success, but if we don't do something, we won't change behaviour because we haven't done with the pattern race changes we've already made. So it needs to be more than we've done, I think, and certainly in an Irish context, it's something we'll be looking at within next year's budgets as to what we can refocus or retarget, and how we can best incentivise more people to try and breed horses with stamina in the future. And I would just echo Kevin's points, particularly about the median auction series. I think both the auction and the median auction series are really helpful in an Irish context in terms of stratifying the horse population and giving chances for people to be successful without having to you know, always take on the very best, because we do breed the elite of European racing in Ireland. So we are preeminent, but you know, that comes with challenges for those looking to compete, and you know, we have to react to that, and expanding that series, incentivising more in that series, and obviously the likes of Joe Foley and others have come up with great programs and schemes as well in that context. So you know, we work very closely, obviously, as you're well aware, with the ITBA to try and work together on how we can best develop and support Irish breeders to be successful.
Absolutely, and anyone can. Sorry.
Last year we done 21 on the Doncaster breeze up sales, and the top 10 fastest horses in that breeze that year, there was 7 of them rated 65 and below at the end of the year. So like that was. So I'm only just saying that.
It's a scary statistic.
So that statistic wasn't, but I'm just saying, you know, about speed. It's not just all about. But that was just that statistic we done on Donny one.
We'll focus on the good ones, Ado.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We'll focus on the good ones.
And Cathy, just on the question
Yeah.
of cost, because I think, you know, that's always going to be a consideration. So I did look at that in the report, and the IRE bonus, you know, which has been brilliant. You know, I really like the way it works. In just over 2 years that's been in existence, it's paid out, I think, 2.5 million in sales vouchers. It's been a wild success. I went and looked back at all those IRE bonus winners in just the auction and median auction races, and I think there was only 35 of them that would have been relevant to this proposed classic bonus, in that their stallion won over 9.5 furlongs or more. So if you were to apply it retrospectively, which you wouldn't, just for the sake of argument, over 2 years, it would have cost 350,000 to have that additional bonus there. And just to say, I don't think I specified when describing the bonus, in my mind, it would be confined to just the median auction and auction maidens, because that's quite important, because obviously there's a whole heap of stallions there that won over further than 9.5 furlongs that you know, don't need any incentivization, you know, your Frankels, etc. So by confining it to the median auction and the auction races, you're really honing in on that, you know, stallion that stands for a little bit less, that doesn't have as big a sale at median, that's the area that, the analysis has shown, like, really, that's the real sore point that we need to stick our elbow into to try and stimulate.
Just one other point, Cathy, because I think, that there is a perception that there's a slow return on investment with stayers, and that's part of the concern. And Britain actually did some analysis, BHA, on that, and they found that I think 82% of stayers who subsequently won black type races had run as a 2-year-old, and 50% of them had won as a 2-year-old. So I think this idea that the staying horse only really performs as a 3-year-old isn't in fact borne out. The good ones are able to win, and in fact, typically would win as a 2-year-old, and certainly will be seen on the racetrack. So it's to John's point, really, that I think there's a confusion perhaps between precocity and speed, and the best stayers typically will be out as 2-year-olds, and that was very interesting. But it shows just how true that fact is.
And I'm sure any trainer would tell you now, Cathy, and I'm sure Ado would have experienced it plenty himself. Like, if you run a 2-year-old in a 7-furlong maiden, from now on, or even a few weeks before now, and they're owned by, a syndicate or a smaller owner, if you run second, third, fourth, the phone's going to be hopping within an hour of the race. The trade for that type of horse, you don't even need to be winning these maidens. The trade there is just phenomenal, and that applies to auction maidens, the median auction maidens as well. Like, the demand there is massive, and because of what Stuart alluded to earlier, there's so much demand for the really nice horses that it naturally, the cycle of it is, it'll come further down the line. If people think, right, the group winner is far too expensive, the maiden winner then becomes far too expensive, then they're looking at the second, thirds, fourths, then they're looking at yearlings. It does move down along, and as you said, Cathy, that's already happening in terms of Americans and Australians turning up at the Orby sale or whatever it may be, trying to get in at that level because they feel the market is too inflated at the higher steps up along. So, like there are trading opportunities very early. You don't need, it doesn't. If you're buying the middle distance type of horse, you're not necessarily needing to wait until year 2 to get a payout. You could potentially get a payout, well less than a year after you purchase.
And that's an interesting point, because if you saw, there was a huge influx of American buyers to Goffs last year, and they did a great job at getting people there. But the one bit of feedback was that they couldn't find enough of the horses that they wanted, which is this exact type of horse that we're talking about here. So that is interesting feedback to bear in mind. Now, I think we'd all be delighted to hear what the people here have to say. So if anybody has any comments or questions that they would like to share with the panel, or any questions for our esteemed speakers, maybe Una and Danielle are around, maybe, and Hannah, maybe if you would like to raise your hand, they'll go to you.
Not all at once now.
Oh, don't be shy. There we go, in the middle.
It's not an awkward question for Jason. It's okay, Jason, you can relax. No, who would be a breeder is what I was thinking to myself, because if you set criteria based on the stallion, you would leave out an awful lot of really successful stayers in recent times, And I think Cape Cross is a really interesting horse, because he's by a July Cup winner out of a daughter of Ahanura, and yet you've all the middle distance horses that he bred, were hugely successful. Dunedin, they tried to make a stallion out of Dunedin as a grandson of Indian Ridge. There's a whole lot of examples of horses where the breeder didn't set out necessarily to breed a Gold Cup horse or a stayer, but that's what they got, And I think it's interesting what they did with the Chesham, in that, it takes two to tango. And the focus just on the stallions is fine, but I mean, more middle distance mares producing, going to whatever stallion you need to do to find enough speed to win these top races, that's important too, So I'm not really asking a question. I'm just pointing out that Emmeline is here as well. The predictability of what's going to be a successful stallion over any distance is really difficult, and there's a sense that the breeders can fix this. I'm not sure that it's just about the breeders, because it is really hard to define or predict what's going to be a successful horse, particularly over a long distance.
Anybody else? So, here, just here at the front.
We have stallions, and I think a lot of people will breed for fashion, but they don't actually do the stats on the stallions. You know what I mean? Because obviously it's a buyer's market, and they're going to want to sell their horses. But I think and then obviously a lot of stallions cover a lot more mares, so their stats are going to be pumped up because 90% of it is the mare. Whether people want you to believe that or not, a lot of it is the mare, because we've covered mares with the worst stallions ever and got winners. But I think if you do the stats on the stallions, a lot of the stallions wouldn't hold up because they're covering the best mares and getting covered over. So my grandfather had a stallion called Vulcan. And he got a lot of bad mares and he upgraded them. But when he got the good mares, he didn't get any better winners. He just got winners. And I think if you went through the mares and went through the stallions, I think you'd find a lot of the stallions don't actually hold up at all.
Well, this is where I'll do my annual plug for the Weatherby's Return of Mares. It's my favourite book. And if you want to do your homework on your stallions, it also gives you an invaluable look at how many they're covering and what they're covering. So it's something that I always have on my desk. So there.
And it's a fair point that the two lads make. In fairness, Cathy, the study has really honed in on stallions because that's the most practical thing to do. You know, assessing the mares from a statistical point of view is a bit tricky because, you know, there's a fair proportion of them that are unraced. You know, it's a more difficult thing to capture in the numbers. But look, the mare does play a massive role in this. And, you know, I know myself, like I do try to practice as I preach in terms of what I really want to breed myself is a horse that's going to stay 10 furlongs and go on fast ground. That's what I want to breed. But because of the practical difficulties that we've discussed in that, there isn't, for me, enough stallions available in the market at the right price with the right commercial profile for me to really lean into. I've had to approach it from the opposite side in terms of the mares that I've bought. You know, mares that have won over 1.5 miles, and then you might send them to a miler. You know, to give a simple example, you know, going about trying to achieve the same result, just the other way around, as a consequence of the right stallions not being available. You know, and that option is available to everyone too. And you know, there's clearly a great choice in mares. So it's not just all about the stallions, but I think it's important that the stallion options become available. If you know the addressing of the balance that we keep talking about is to be a bit more scalable, you know, we need a better choice of stallions that fit that sort of bill.
No, I think that's a very good point. Do we have any other questions from anybody? Any comments?
And now they're really going.
So yeah, I took 5 foals to the sales last year, and the only one I took home was a middle distance stallion. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation. It's, you know, you'll get more stallions if people are willing to buy the foals, and at the moment it is really tough to sell the middle distance. That's just a fact. And in Australia, you guys are breeding sprinters because you guys can sell the sprinters in your country, and it's the same here. We're not breeding middle distance because, oh, we just don't want to. We want to, but it's just really tough to sell them. So that's my point.
I have a question for Kevin there, please. Kevin, the bonus scheme you were talking about, supposing the side of the powers that be decided to introduce that for next year, you were talking about the lead-in time being 3 years. Would it make sense if that bonus ever materialised for the foals that will be sold at the end of this year and the yearlings, if they qualified for it, that they should be included in it?
Yeah, well, theoretically, like, you could start it next year, and it would impact on the yearling sales and the foal sales that, you know, later this year. Theoretically, you know, it's something that you hope that when you bring it in, it starts influencing breeders' decisions. But really, you could theoretically bring it in next year, and that would start impacting on the buyers' decisions. Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, like, these things aren't straightforward, and it would take a bit of hammering. But in theory, I don't see why that couldn't happen.
No, I would agree, and it probably answers both the points that have just been made. That, you know, how do we change your buying behaviour? Because for your, you know, you want your foal out of a middle distance mare to be sold. So, you know, the only way we can do that is to encourage people to go out and buy the foals, but the yearlings, because they know the scheme's in place already. So in terms of changing the stallion you might send your mares to, that won't happen obviously until the 24 covering, and that doesn't follow through to a 28 3-year-old. But there's no reason why we can't start to change buying behaviour and ownership behaviour and you know, what trainers are looking at. And the more we can encourage the market, the better it will be. So, yeah, I totally agree with both those points. We have to change. It's not just about breeding behaviour. What will change? Well, I think we discussed it at an ITBA when we had a meeting, HR and ITBA had a meeting and a brainstorm about this. You know, British buying behaviour is probably the biggest influencing factor on Irish breeding behaviour because that's our key export market. So we have to change, you know, the buying behaviour, and that can be done quicker by bringing in incentive schemes, you know, appropriately targeted and appropriately structured. So yeah, let's hope we can move forwards with that much sooner rather than later.
Okay, Una, you have somebody there.
Yeah, hi, Julia from Australia. I suppose the other thing that has to be factored into with this is going to be the welfare aspect. Because in Australia at the moment, we obviously are prioritising, as Stuart knows, is into the 2 and 3-year-olds. And we don't keep our horses longer into the system either. And I do think this would have to be also part of the planning of all of this, to keep our horses running longer and in the system. What does everyone think about that?
Look, at the end of the day, Australian breeding kind of feels a bit like planned obsolescence. You know, it's the wheel turns very quickly, and it suits breeders for that to happen. You know, you go back in, you know where your fate stands at the end of the 2-year-old year, and often buy again, go again. You know, so the cycle turns very, very quickly. So from a welfare point of view, keeping them in the system for longer would make sense. Obviously, they're being used as racehorses, which they're bred to do. Look, ultimately, the laws of supply and demand are going to determine how many horses are bred, you know, and I can only say on my side that there's over-demand and under-supply of a certain type of horse, and the market isn't providing the incentives for the breeder to go and breed that. So the incentivization idea is the most sensible. Just to touch on the point about not being able to sell the middle distance bred foal, I feel that I work in the breeze upsell market, in particular in the pinhookers. Their buying behaviour of yearlings have definitely changed in the last 5 years. The horses they're going to buy at the yearling stage to what they're breeding is definitely becoming a bigger horse and a horse that at least get a mile, if not further. So it may flow on, it might just take a bit longer, would be my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. If you looked at buyer behaviour at a pinhooking level previously, they would have focused on the earlier types, definitely. As Stuart says, as the market has developed, the buyer behaviour is starting to change. But if you think from a pinhooker, you don't have to buy unless you find that horse that you want. They are the hardest buying bunch to please. They are only buying something that they want to turn around in a very short space of time and make an early sale, usually. So they are not prone to buying horses that they are worried if maybe they look like they're going to take more time or if they're not going to make those sales. So I think it is changing, but as we've all said up here, it's talking about, you know, changing people's behaviour, and it does take a little bit of a while for that process to filter through. Anybody else? Is there?
Just interested to hear your thoughts on, I suppose, the level of competition when you talk about the middle distance horse. I'd say historically in the last 5 to 7 years, it's been incredibly difficult for trainers to compete at that sort of middle distance level because, more or less because of the existence of Galileo. I mean, races became so uncompetitive, and it was very hard for, I suppose, middle to lower end trainers to get those horses to compete at that higher level in those mile to 10 furlong races, whereas, you know, those trainers can go to the likes of a Doncaster yearling sale, whatever it might be, and compete in a 5 furlong maiden here. So I suppose with the sad passing of Galileo, is that something that we could see more of? Like, will that level of competition lessen slightly, and potentially I suppose those trainers can sort of compete at that level, sort of the equivalent of what they do in 5-6 furlong maidens at the moment now?
No, I think at the moment, like, even competing in, like, with the medium auction races and the auction, that eliminates them horses. And if they're middle, you know, a race that's a mile or mile and a half or mile 2 for that bracket of horse. And I know last year I had 2 horses that were placed in maidens and they were sold to America, like, and one was in a medium auction race and another one was in one night in Dundalk, it finished second to one of Joseph's, a very good horse of Joseph's, and we sold it. Like, rather than run it again and risk getting it beat, we sold it straight away and we got good money for it. So that market will there. I don't think it'll make the auction maiden races do cover for that, because you don't have to take on them bigger sires then.
Yeah, look, I think in the bigger picture terms, like, I think the next 10 years is going to be the most interesting for middle distance racing in a long time, I think, because, you know, for much of the last decade, we had that perfect storm of, you know, the best trainer in the world getting the pick of the best stallion in the world in Galileo and Aidan O'Brien, and, you know, that translated to a certain level of dominance in the middle distance division. But, you know, that era, you know, Galileo's passed away, and Aidan O'Brien isn't going anywhere, but I think it's going to open up that middle distance division at the very higher level to a greater extent going forward. And look, one of the interesting numbers I pulled out for the study is because there would be a perception, as David says, that middle distance racing, it isn't as accessible. It's a smaller amount of hands on the best horses. But when you look at the horses rated 115 plus over 9 furlongs or further, they were bred in the UK and Ireland last year, and about a fifth of them, 20%, were bred on stallion fees of 15 grand or less, you know, which is quite surprising. I think 20% might seem a small number, but when you look at the stallions available in that bracket of that profile, you know, I thought it was certainly a lot higher than I expected it to be. So look, while no one is saying it's easy, you know, I think that top level of middle distance racing isn't as inaccessible to the smaller breeder as might be widely perceived.
Well, actually, I'd like to ask John Ox the question, because John, in your role currently with Staffordstown, obviously Kirsten Rising, who's Landwades in Staffordstown, is the doyenne of middle distance and stamina breeding, and her stallion profile would definitely, you know, play into that. And she's one of those stallion masters that has sort of booked the trend from that point of view. And certainly from your training career, where you would have trained for an awful lot of the best owner breeders in the country, would you see a change in the profile of the way owner breeders have, is there been a decrease in that type of person, you know, keeping those horses in training? Have you seen that change?
Have I seen a change in the number of people? Sorry, just
sort of like the breeders who would have middle distance horses, you know, who would have had that profile of horse.
Well, I think you know, the established owner breeders do their own thing, because if they're not selling them, as yearlings, they're free to do so, and I think they stick to their guns because they're trying to breed a good horse. They're all dreamers, you know, as we all were, and. We start off as dreamers anyway, so they stick to their guns. I wouldn't think they have rushed to breed a more precocious horse. The people I've dealt with anyway, and I must say, since I started in this particular role, and Kirsten would have, you know, a lot of the horses you mentioned. She's had plenty of lookers at them, and even at, you know, the book 2 and the book 3 and all that. There's a steady stream of people coming looking at middle distance horses, yearlings bred to be middle distance horses, and the lads there tell me that there are certainly more people now looking at them. So I can see a bit of a change already. But no, the established owner breeders, they have their eye on the bigger prize all the time. They have their idea that they all love to win the Derby and, you know, win big middle distance races. They've never been blinded by the bright lights of Royal Ascot 2-year-old races.
Una, you've a question down the back there, do you?
Can we just ask the panel, please, because there's often an intuitive response to 2-year-old winner as implying precocity and speed and 5 furlongs and 6 furlongs, yet that view tends to overlook the fact that we start relatively early in the year at 7 furlongs and moved to a mile, and they're still 2-year-old winners. Is it possible to ask the panel what their view would be of the effect of increasing the number of 7 furlong and mile races for 2-year-olds and decreasing the number over 5 and 6? Thank you.
Well, I think it's something you already see in France to an extent. Like, I know from looking through the French program, in terms of 2-year-olds, like, God, if you have a sprint 2-year-old in France, like, it's very difficult. You know, there's just not anything like the spread of options that we have in the UK and Ireland. So I don't know if that's a conscious thing that they've done, or it's just the way it's developed, or if they're responding to the type of horse their trainers buy and breed and blah blah. But look, I think the demand is there for them. Like, I think there's already, like Jason mentioned it earlier, in terms of the percentage of stakes races that are over what we would imply as middle distances as 3-year-old plus, but it's also mirrored there amongst 2-year-olds. I have it here, 46% of stakes races run in Britain and Ireland in 2022 were run over 7 furlong plus. You know, so when one looks at the way we're breeding our mares, the program would still, I feel, already edge you towards that type of horse that's bred to stay 7 furlongs plus. Do we need to lean that even further in that direction? I wouldn't be against it, but is it necessary? I think it's already leaning heavily in that direction already.
Jason, how would you feel?
No, I think so. Certainly in an Irish context anyway, we've always probably started our 7 furlong maidens earlier, I think, than Britain, and we have certainly a higher proportion of our 2-year-old maidens over 7 or 8 furlongs. You know, I think we have targeted the middle distance horse. We're not as focused on that Royal Ascot type 2-year-old, and we don't have as many early season 5 furlong maidens as a result. So I think our programme is largely catering. I suppose that's, you know, one of the key points is that I think the Irish programme does really cater for more of a middle distance horse than a sprinter, which, you know, historically is why we've had so few probably, you know, elite sprinters in Ireland. And you know, I remember Soul Power, I think, ran sort of 20 consecutive races outside of Ireland because there was no opportunity for him in the country until we obviously brought the Flying Five up to Grade 1. So, you know, we do target, I think, already. It's a fair point Des makes. It's probably more relevant to the British than it is, I think, to the Irish. And I do know Britain are, you know, as focused on this issue as Ireland is. I mean, we have to work in tandem with them, given the importance of the connected breeding industries. You know, they have increased a lot of values, I think, of maiden and novice races aimed at middle distance horses. They're making, you know, they had a TBA seminar, which I'm sure you're aware of, which, you know, focused on this exact same issue. So they are doing everything they can to try and change, I think, buying behaviour, owning behaviour, and you know, where trainers are targeting their horses in Britain as well, which is obviously vital in terms of our export market.
Absolutely. When 70% of our horses are exported to the English market, I think that's a very good point, Jason, is that it's very important that this isn't just seen as an Irish or an English. This is an issue that affects, you know, we're very codependent upon each other, and I think that's very, very important, and it's great to hear that, you know, they are focusing on the same issues. John, would you like to say something?
Just briefly, it's been said already, but yeah, we've already brought in 7 furlong, 6 and 7 furlong 2-year-old races much earlier than years ago. When I was a kid, it was a big thing. They had to wait quite a while for the first 6 furlong maiden, and even longer for the first 7 furlong maiden. I have an old race card at home from the Guineas Day, 2000 Guineas Day in 1961. And there was a 5 furlong maiden on. There were 20 runners. And in it were the favourite for the Epsom Derby. My father had Arctic Storm, who won the 2000 Guineas the following year, was beaten in the first Sweeps Derby. He finished 3rd. Arctic Vale, who won the Irish St. Leger the following year. Sicilian Prince, who won the French St. Leger the following year. And a series of other horses like Assurance, I remember their names well. They all ran in the Classics the following year. They ran in a 5 furlong maiden on Guineas Day at the Curragh. But that was the way then. People got on with them because we know all weather gallops. Horses were quiet during the summer because the ground was too firm, and trainers broke their horses early worked them, gave them a few runs, maybe a run, and then put them away for the autumn. But they were well able to run over 5 furlongs and run well. Just another little bit of useless information.
No, amazing information. Sorry, Danielle, do you have a question there?
Hello, I'd like to say how refreshing it is to hear the sentence which will resonate with me today will be the greater good of the breed. And in a society where we live with instant whip, instant coffee, instant photography, it's very refreshing to hear, yes, speed is so important, but not for your quick lick, boo, bum, wham, wallop, but it's also there if you think back, like Red Rum won over 5 furlongs as a 2-year-old, and I'd like to thank everyone for making the point, the greater good of the breed.
Brilliant, thank you. It's very good to hear. Una has a question there.
Well, I'd like to say, Kevin, well done for your efforts, and but I think ultimately the most refreshing thing is Ado sitting up there. You keep talking, everyone keeps talking about changing buyer behaviour, and Ado, it's refreshing to hear you sit there and say, why should you change? You have a system that works. And ultimately, I was at a seminar like this maybe 7 years ago, and we were I said about the ledger, its profile was changing, and I think Jason said that there's an embargo on the downgrading of those races. It ultimately is probably a Group 2, if not a Group 3, at this stage. Like, the profile is completely damned. And does it come back to breeding for purpose? We retire all these ledger horses to cover jumps mares, yet French bred horses dominate our store sales. Would there not be, if we incentivised racing national hunt end tyres, would we ultimately return to breeding for purpose, and we could use our ledger horses to breed flat horses? Again, it comes back to changing buyer behaviour, but surely you look at the French breeding programme, it's much more cosmopolitan. I know they have their breeders' premiums, but they race their end tyres over jumps, and that takes less away from the flat racing pool, surely.
It's a really interesting point, because we haven't mentioned it as such, only briefly once, I think. But the national hunt sector does have an impact on what we're talking about here in a flat context, in that, like, I would think there's quite a few horses retiring directly to be national hunt stallions every year that, you know, really and truly probably should be given a chance on the flat, but they're worth more to stand as national hunt stallions. But then, like you say, you look at what's happening in the national hunt sphere, and I know it's a much bigger debate for another day in terms of stallion profiles and why the French breds are doing so well. I know that's a huge discussion point in national hunt, but yeah, like that would be in my mind as well, in terms of what we can do from a flat point of view to incentivize that type of stallion to be given a go on the flat. Because, like, I think France is a really interesting example, in that there's stallions given chances there on the flat that would probably never get a chance in Ireland or the UK. You know, Galloway springs to mind, you know, a listed winner by Galileo. It wouldn't have got a chance here. He was given a chance there, really heavily supported by the man standing him, and now he's probably going to end up being one of the best stallions in France. And you'll find examples like that, horses that didn't necessarily come up to the level you'd expect, or the level they'd need to get a place as a flat stallion in Ireland or the UK with that type of profile, but they get a go in France, and some of them work. And it's the same, it's the same is true of the sprinter profile in the UK and Ireland. There's a whole heap of them that probably, you could argue, shouldn't get a chance in Ireland or the UK, but there's demand for them, they get a chance, and you get a horse like Kodiak comes up, who, you know, his race profile wasn't good enough, you could argue, but he got the opportunity, he got the numbers, and he turned out to be one of the best stallions in Europe. You know, so the more of the middle distance horses that are given a chance, the more you churn them, you know, the better chance you have of one or two popping up that really work and make a really, you know, positive impact on the breed.
Okay, Danielle, you have a question there.
As a small breeder who spends most of the year trying to decide what stallions I'm going to use, the biggest difficulty I have is getting my hands on unbiased information. when I get the Coolmore beautiful brochure in, I want to send my mares to all the Coolmore stallions until I get the Yeomanstown one in. So the question is, in the livestock industry, breeders use a BLUP system for evaluation. It's unbiased. The U in BLUP means unbiased. So it's a performance analysis system which is completely unbiased. We have no such system in the horse racing industry. Why is that?
Well, look, I suppose, John, like the information is there, and it probably comes down to the individual to hammer the numbers themselves. I know I certainly do. Some sources are better than others. It isn't straightforward. I'd say that the data in the bloodstock sector isn't as streamlined as it could be. You know, we often find ourselves having to go to different places to get different numbers and then try to marry it all together and work out what's significant and what's pertinent and what's not. And I suppose there's a beauty in it, John, because if someone somewhere was doing this in a brilliantly effective and unbiased manner, and we'd probably all end up wanting to send our mares to a very small group of stallions, and a lot of the guesswork, educated guesswork, if you will, would be taken out of it. But yeah, look, everyone. The beauty of this is everyone has their own way. Everyone has their own emphases that they like to place on certain variables, and so that's the great thing. You know, I could do my thing my way. Someone on the opposite side of the room could do it the complete opposite way, and you know, one of us ends up breeding a Group 1 winner, and the other one ends up breeding a yak. It doesn't mean that either of us was right or wrong, but it's the glorious uncertainty of what we're doing that makes it so interesting, I think.
I don't think that's the politically correct word, Kevin. They're all lovely horses. Una, I think you have a question for us down there, do you?
No, I think we're all asked down here, unless anyone else.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had somebody. Sorry. No. So does anybody else have any questions for our panel? Oh, we've one here.
You talked earlier on about the incentive races, but a lot of the incentive races are currently hosted by the big auction houses like Tattersalls and Goffs, and they're all geared towards the 2-year-olds and towards the sprint races. Would it not be possible to have races for 3-year-olds over a mile, over 10 furlongs, or even maybe a longer distance to encourage the buyer to look for those pedigrees and to buy those horses?
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I can understand why they structure it the way they do at the minute, in that ultimately they're sales company initiatives, and the sales companies will ultimately act in their own interests. And I suppose it's for them, if they put a race on, they want it to coincide with the following year's yearling sales, so that in the hope that someone might, you know, win the Goffs Million and then go back to Goffs to, you know, spend the money, etc. Same applies to Tattersalls. So I think that's why the way it's evolved as it has. I know Tattersalls didn't they have a 10 furlong 3-year-old race a few years back? It wasn't persevered with, but I fully take your point, and it would be beneficial. It's whether you could convince the sales companies that it was the right thing to do or not would be your challenge, I suspect.
Very good. Well, I see plenty of people from the sales companies here, so maybe they'll take that on board.
I was going to say, in Australia, the Magic Millions have now expanded theirs a lot. So it used to just be a 2-year-old race. Now it's a whole race day. You know, so there's 10 different races, 3-year-old stayers, all different categories. And it's been hugely successful and changed a lot of the market dynamics in Australia.
Great. So. Excellent. So I suppose now we're getting to the end of today. We're looking at the racing starting off soon, and there's going to be some refreshments afterwards, so I hope you'll all stay to circulate and share your ideas and have some food and do some networking and meet lots of people. But I'll just ask the panel if we could just have a closing remark from all of you, just your final thoughts.
Oh God, yeah. I've got 5,000 words of thoughts spewed out on the page there.
Keep it short.
Yeah, look, sure. Look, I think that when you look at the facts and you look at the data, like, there is an imbalance there, and I hope that the people in this room, and maybe that might view it later on, or that maybe have read the report, that it will resonate. And like, I'm not expecting anyone to go and change their strategy overnight, but you know, there is scope, I think, for every breeder to have these considerations in their mind that, you know, looking to breed a middle distance horse isn't commercial suicide. I don't think, you know, the numbers very much support that it can be a commercial endeavor, and I would hope that across British and Irish breeders that there is a little bit of a change in mindset and behavior and amongst the stallion masters that might give this type of horse that we keep talking about a chance at stud at the right level, to give the commercial breeders, the breeders that want to operate at the lower end of the nomination scale, a chance to have a go and see will it work for them. Because as we keep coming back to, we need to hit every link of the chain if this is to work. And my closing thought is, I hope the refreshments include hot whiskies or something like that, because it's turning into a fairly miserable evening.
Stuart.
What Kevin said. There's under demand for this type of horse. There's over demand and under supply. It's a hard thing to go, and it's a balance. You know, if I was in a situation where, you know, if I had 6 mares, I might breed 2 more established mares with the mind of trying to breed a milder 10 furlong horse. I wouldn't go to one extreme or the other. It's a balance.
A balance, so. Excellent. Ado.
Yeah, I think the same with me. Like at this present moment in time, I swing towards the speed because it's the practicality of it. But certainly, I would love to be able to train middle distance horses, but it's the practicality of buying that type of a horse and being competitive with it. And I would love to be able to do it. So, if the breeders can breed the horses that we can afford to buy, I know they have to get rewarded as well. Well, then I would do. But at the moment, the practicality for me is to try and buy the sharper horse to sell it.
Excellent. And Jason?
I think Kevin summed it up brilliantly, but I think, you know, from a European pattern perspective, we're trying to encourage the production, the ownership and retention of the best horses in the world in Europe, and we are preeminent in the middle distance area, and anything we can do from a horse racing Ireland perspective in terms of incentive schemes or facilitating new breed ups, we will certainly try to work with the ITBA hand in glove and continue to develop the actions that have already been taken. So hopefully we've made some progress, but there's still work to be done to try and really change behaviour, and we'll be doing our very best to work alongside you, Cathy, and the ITBA to do that.
Well, that's excellent, because we've had a great relationship, ITBA and HRI, and it's resulted in a very successful IRE incentive scheme, which was fantastic cooperation. So I'm looking forward to many more successful things where we can deliver success not just for racing but for breeding as well. And John?
Well, you'll see a lot of horses running in blinkers here this weekend. And all I can say is we're all trainers like myself, breeders, everybody. We've been wearing blinkers for quite a while, and it's time we took them off. Can't think of anything else.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody for coming. Thank you to our wonderful panel, who I'm sure you would agree have given us some excellent food for thought and their time and their expertise. Thank you all for being here and for continuing the discussion and for helping us to make a better industry for Irish breeders and for racing going forward. And I think, one of the key things that's come out of this, is for the good of the industry, for the good of the horse, and to just bring a bit of balance to the whole thing so that we can be successful in the marketplace and on the racetrack. So thank you very much.